All right, we'll get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Farrell-Skelton, and I'm the project coordinator of collaborations for researchmatch.org. Welcome, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. This webinar is offered in collaboration with our presenter, Dr. Joan Levy from the Melanoma Research Alliance, and three panelists, Dr. Charlotte Aryan, Leah Adams, and Amy Jardin. Just a short disclaimer, this information and statements expressed on this webinar are not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Viewers should seek their own professional counsel for any medical condition and before altering an existing care plan. As an overview of Research Match, we were created at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and were funded by the National Institutes of Health. Since 2009, we have been connecting people who are interested in learning about research studies with researchers across the United States who are looking for people to be involved and participate in their research. Research Match is available at no cost to everyone, and thousands of people have taken part in research through Research Match. We are a collaborative project that connects you, the volunteers, with the currently registered research institutions in the country and other nonprofit organizations like our collaborator here today, the Melanoma Research Alliance, or MRA. And here is our network across the United States. So I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter and panelists today. Our presenter is Dr. Joan Levy, the Chief Science Officer at MRA. In this role, she works with MRA's scientific team and leadership to set the scientific vision for the organization and oversees all aspects of MRA's research program. Joan has more than 30 years of experience in oncology research in academic, pharmaceutical, and disease foundation settings. Next, we have Dr. Charlotte Aryan, and she is the Carol Bassick Lauenstein Endowed Chair at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Chair of MRA's Grant Review Committee, and a member of MRA's Medical Advisory Panel. Dr. Aryan is a board-certified general surgeon specializing in surgical oncology with clinical expertise in melanoma and soft tissue sarcoma. She works closely with patients and multidisciplinary care teams to tailor individual treatment plans to each patient. Next is Leah Adams, a melanoma patient advocate, stage 1A cutaneous survivor, and caregiver to her father, who is currently living with stage 4 melanoma. Leah is a member of MRA's Leadership Council and an online advocate for melanoma prevention and early detection. Our third panelist is Amy Jardin. Amy is an acral melanoma survivor. Amy is a patient advisor on MRA's Rare Registry Oversight Committee. Amy raises awareness of rare melanoma subtypes, the importance of advocating for yourself, and seeing a melanoma specialist when diagnosed. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thanks so much, Caitlin, and thanks so much, Research Match, for giving us the opportunity to discuss major advancements that have been made in the melanoma field over the last 2 decades. And this only came about due to the devotion of researchers, clinicians, patients, patient advocates, foundations, government agencies, and industry to really work together to learn more about the biology of the disease and really help move those findings into the clinic to do clinical research trials to be able to advance treatments to melanoma patients and have their disease better managed. So I'm very fortunate to be here today, as you heard, with 2 patients, Leah Adams and Amy Jardin, who will share their journeys and some of the research that they've been involved with. And of course, I'm delighted to have Dr. Charlotte Aryan here today, who's leading the melanoma program at Memorial Sloan Kettering. She'll share her perspective through the lens of a clinician who treats patients and also does research. So before I get started, just let me introduce the Melanoma Research Alliance, or the MRA. which is the largest private nonprofit funder of melanoma research in the world. And we have supported about 175 million in funding to support more than 500 research projects. And as I mentioned, we fund globally. So we fund about 19 countries' research programs. And our mission, what we're really dedicated to, is funding and advancing the most innovative and promising melanoma research. And the majority of MRA-funded researchers really have been at the forefront of every breakthrough in melanoma research since our founding. And 100% of all donations go directly to support MRA's scientific program. So really, I've been here for 5 years working with incredible clinicians and researchers, and very proud to be part of this organization. So let me tell you a little bit about melanoma, perhaps melanoma 101. And for those of you who don't know, melanoma is a cancer of the pigment producing cells called melanocytes, and they give us our unique skin color. Now, the majority of melanomas, about 90%, originate on sun-exposed skin, but they can also, as you'll hear, about 10% develop in other parts of the body. And unlike more of the common skin cancers like basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, melanoma is more likely to spread to other parts of the body. So it makes it harder to detect and also to treat. And just a few additional facts before we get started. Melanoma is one of the most common cancers in the United States. About more than 100,000 Americans will be diagnosed with melanoma in 2025. Also, as I mentioned, the majority of melanomas originate on the sun-exposed skin. So it's thought to be caused by exposure to ultraviolet radiation from the sun or indoor tanning beds. And the average American with melanoma is 63 years old, but it's interesting that melanoma is increasingly diagnosed in young women between the ages of 20 to 40, and is one of the most common cancers in this age group. Now, you'll hear we've made tremendous progress in the field in treating the disease and keeping patients alive much longer. But we do have unmet medical needs in detection and diagnosis. And then we have gaps in better understanding how to treat the rare subtypes of melanoma that you'll be hearing about later. How to tackle treatment-resistant disease. There are about 50% of patients that don't respond to their treatments or progress after receiving treatment. And also, as I mentioned, melanoma spreads to different parts of the body, and brain metastases and what's called leptomeningeal disease is an area that we need more research to find better treatments. So with that being said, I am going to turn my questions over to Leah Adams to describe her journey. And she had a very unique journey because, as she mentioned, her father was diagnosed with melanoma, and then shortly afterwards, she was diagnosed. So her journey with cutaneous melanoma, not only as a patient, but also as a caregiver. So Leah, why don't you describe that journey and what it's been like?
Yeah, thank you, Joan. And it's a pleasure to be here today. As Joan mentioned, I'm a melanoma survivor, stage 1A, and a caregiver to my dad, who is now living with stage 4 metastatic melanoma. And our journey with melanoma started back in 2019, where ironically, my dad had his first bout with melanoma and had a in situ stage 0 melanoma on his upper back. Mom found the mole. Thank goodness for moms and wives. And, as an in situ, it was treated as an outpatient surgery and was told to return every 6 months for skin checks. And then a month later, my mom found a mole on me that was suspicious on my chest and told me that I should really get it checked out. And, I shrugged it off at first because I was 26 years old at the time and never thought that I would get skin cancer because, to Joan's point, what she just shared, I always thought melanoma was an older person's cancer, right? It would never impact me at my mid-20s. And so ever since my mom brought it to my attention and knowing her experience of finding my dad's melanoma, I started going down the Google rabbit hole of searching what melanoma looked like and all that good stuff. And then I finally just said, you know what, I'll just go see a dermatologist, get a skin check. And so I did. And it was my first skin check ever at age 26. And the only mole that they wanted to remove was that one my mom pointed out on my chest that didn't look right. And they biopsied it. And 2 weeks later, I got the results, and I had stage 1A, bordering stage 1B melanoma. And the first thing I thought of when I got those results was, oh my gosh, my melanoma is worse than what my dad's was a month before. And it was treated a little bit differently, knowing I was bordering stages and my family history with melanoma. They did a wide local excision, removed the melanoma from my chest, and then they also did a sentinel lymph node biopsy to see if the melanoma spread to my lymph nodes or any local organs. And luckily, I was extremely grateful that, after surgery and getting results back from the sentinel lymph node biopsy, that they were able to remove all of the melanoma. It did not spread to my lymph nodes or organs. And yeah, it was definitely an eye-opening experience. And, it really taught me that even though you're in your 20s, anybody can be impacted by cancer, especially melanoma. And knowing that, after melanoma, I realized I had a lot of risk factors for it. I had the family history, I had a lot of moles, I had a lot of exposure to UV rays from both the sun and tanning beds for many years. And I just, before melanoma, didn't care about protecting the skin that I was in and had to learn a really hard lesson. And so after that, I wanted to find community in melanoma. And I started reaching out to organizations like the Melanoma Research Alliance and so many others, and wanted to find others that understood melanoma, because at the time it was really isolating because you felt like you were the only person that had that experience, especially being so young. And then, we're now approaching 2021. At the end of 2021, my dad had a seizure while driving with my mom. And he was rushed to the hospital, and they did a bunch of scans, and they did a scan of his brain, and his brain lit up like a Christmas tree. There were lesions all over his brain. And then they wanted to scan the rest of his body to see if there was anything else in his body. And then they scanned his lungs, and his lungs lit up like a Christmas tree. There were lesions all over his lungs. And before, doing any biopsies, his doctors thought that the lesions resembled metastatic melanoma. And, they never want to go into the brain unless they absolutely have to. And so they did a lung biopsy, and they took one of the lesions from his lungs, came back stage 4 metastatic melanoma. And so they kind of put 2 and 2 together, that his melanoma returned, and it returned with a vengeance. And from 2021 to the end of 2022, my dad went through 7 rounds of gamma knife radiation for his brain and 21 rounds of immunotherapy. And that completely rocked our world. What's really crazy about melanoma is that, you can have melanoma, whether it's stage 0, stage 1, 2, 3, 4. It all presents very differently. And there's a huge difference between catching it early and not catching it early. And when I tell my dad's story, it kind of scares people because it's very rare for something like that to happen to somebody. But, after having a lot of conversations with his doctors, they're pretty confident that, his stage 0 and stage 4 were 2 different primary sources of the cancer. And so I'm happy to say that today, speaking here, after many rounds of treatment and going through a lot of, life-changing experiences, my dad is stable. He's been off treatment now since November of 2022, and just recently graduated to every 6-month scans. And his scans now, compared to 2021, when he was first diagnosed, are dramatically different. His lesions in both the brain and lungs are almost non-existent. He only has a couple of lesions left in his brain and lungs. And I'm really grateful for that. And it's because of the research that is happening, that the Melanoma Research Alliance backs and supports. And so we're extremely grateful that we're here today and we're able to say that, we made it through melanoma. And now I'm an advocate for, melanoma awareness and advocacy and prevention, because melanoma can impact anybody, no matter your race, your age, your ethnicity. Anyone can experience it. So that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah, for sharing that story. I want to mention to everyone that Leah is a very amazing advocate. And, obviously it must have been so hard for you, to hear about your father's diagnosis and then your diagnosis and then his rapid progression and how to deal with that. Because again, you're not only the patient, but you're a caregiver trying to get your father the best treatment possible. But just out of curiosity, were there any other family members that had been diagnosed with melanoma?
To our knowledge, it was just my dad and I, but we do know that his father, my grandfather, had a number of basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas over his lifetime.
So that leads me into the question, people think about research studies that they're clinical trials testing treatments, but there are other types of research studies. And you went into a research study that examined the genetic risk factors based on the fact that your father and you had melanoma. So I'd love for you to share your anything about this research study and why you felt it was so important to do.
Absolutely. So, I was the first one that was enrolled in it. Both my father and I received care at the Cleveland Clinic. And, I was first told about it because at the time they knew about my, dad's stage 0 and then my stage 1. And I was enrolled into a study to really determine if there is a specific gene mutation that is putting individuals at risk for melanoma and actually other cancers as well. And I think at the time, I knew that, after having cancer, you want to do, at least I wanted to do everything possible to try to prevent this from happening for future generations. And that is how I see research. If we do not have people that are willing to participate to help what's currently going on as far as, research studies and advancements, then we won't be able to get steps closer to hopefully one day a cure or ultimately better treatments that will help more people over time. And my dad, when he had stage 4, the recurrence, he was also told about this study. And so we both kind of were in it together. And they are finding, that there is definitely that genetic component to melanoma. And my dad and I are a testament of that, as far as so many other, father daughters, mother sons, you name it. And just, we know that, this happened to us, whatever reason you want to call it. I think being a part of research, we do our part in really trying to accelerate change and hope in the future of making sure that we can do better when it comes to not only treating melanoma, but other cancers as well. The treatments that have been, studied and done with melanoma are now helping people with other cancers. And knowing that me and my dad are able to do our part, it really is like the ultimate give back, it feels like. And so that's why we wanted to participate in it. And we're hoping that more people will also follow in our footsteps, because the more people we have supporting research and participating in research, I do believe we will get steps closer to better, more effective treatments for melanoma. And like I said, hopefully a cure one day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's such an important, finding genetic risk factors in different cancers are really critical. I mean, major strides have been made in breast and ovarian cancer with the identification of the BRCA1 and 2 genes that predisposes members of families to have a higher incidence of breast or ovarian cancer. And we're hoping we could expand this, these types of studies to other cancers like melanoma in the research that you participated in. So thanks so much for sharing that. And maybe Dr. Arian later can talk about where we're at with genetic risk factors. But I now want to move on to our progress in treatments. And it really was revolutionary in the melanoma field. There have been 17 approved therapeutics in approximately 15 years. Incredible advancements. In the area of immune therapies, what could be better than to try to activate your own immune system to kill melanoma or other cancers? So there's a number of different types of immune therapy. We call them immune checkpoint drugs. You might hear them advertise the Opdivos and Keytrudas. We have oncolytic viruses that are injected into the tumor, and that could destroy the tumor. And then we have the first cell-based therapy that was approved in a solid tumor last year was approved for melanoma. And in addition to immunotherapies, we have targeted therapies. What do we mean by that? We mean that we find something, a target, a protein in a cancer cell that's really driving that cancer cell. And academia and companies can actually find a drug to block that particular target. And so we have targeted therapies called BRAF and MEK inhibitors that have been used to treat melanoma patients that have a particular alteration in the BRAF protein. So all these therapies have really increased a 5-year survival in advanced melanoma from 5% in 2007 to approximately 50% in 2025. That's incredible progress. And as Leah just mentioned, many of the drugs first approved in melanoma are now being used in many other cancers. The immune checkpoints are being used in a tremendous number of other cancers. Now, I think I said this before, but 50% is good, but we want to strive to 100% that will survive be alive at 5 years. So we still need to do a lot of research on finding new therapeutics to help the 50% of patients that are either not responding or progressing through approved treatments, including patients with brain metastases and this leptomeningeal disease, as well as you'll hear later, patients with rare melanoma subtypes. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Dr. Arian and welcome you and ask you, okay, you're a physician, you lead the melanoma program at Memorial Sloan Kettering. You're also a researcher. What drove these amazing and incredible progress in the melanoma field? How could so many drugs be approved? And it might not sound like a lot to many people, but that's a lot of drugs in a decade and a half. So Dr. Arian?
So thank you. It's also a pleasure to be here today. I think one point, and I think Leah touched on some of this, is the melanoma community. Melanoma, as we spoke about, can affect people of all ages, races, ethnicity. And the outcome was so poor for melanoma. So someone like Leah's dad, as you mentioned years ago, would have a survival that was probably less than a year. It was a dismal, prognosis. And that really brought people together in some respects, physicians, researchers, trying to really move the ball forward. It was an unmet need. And also, obviously, we were really facilitated by grant funding. A large part came from organizations like the MRA, who were willing really to accelerate these ideas that we had. And so we're very proud, I think, in the melanoma community because we have worked together. And I think, honestly, some of these areas are rare, as you've also alluded to, and we have to work together to understand these better. So working together not only with these, groups and funding groups, but across institutions and with other physicians and researchers. And so I think we're very proud of that because I think we're also a model to show the success of it. So as you said, we were the first cancer really to show, I think, probably the two major breakthroughs in cancer. One is checkpoint blockade. This is taking the brake off the immune system, first shown to really be effective in melanoma, opened the door to this in many other cancers. It's now used. I don't think there's a single cancer where it's not used or studied today. And we are the launching pad for that in melanoma. Also adoptive T cell therapy, as you said, FDA approved last year. All of that origins was originally in the NIH with, Steve Rosenberg and in the field of melanoma, but now it's being adopted into many, many other types of solid tumors as well. So I think the melanoma community is at the core of this, really. Like I said, with many spokes from physicians to researchers to organizations that were willing to, put their money down to support people doing the work.
Yeah, and I think also it was, clinicians being able to convince their patients to enter into these clinical trials and research studies because, we're talking about 2000, we're not talking about 2025 now. We're talking about back in the early 2000s when these drugs were first being tested. And, there might have been more concerns on the part of patients to enter clinical trials. So, like, I really have to give a shout out to the doctors and the patients who entered these trials to get these drugs approved. It's sometimes scary, but it's so needed to advance any type of treatment in any field.
For
So
sure.
on that note, Dr. Arian, what areas of research are still needed? What would you say are the priorities of research as you see it from both a clinician and someone who does research that would really help advance and perhaps get to those 50% of patients who are not responding or rare melanoma subtypes or even brain mets?
Yeah. So I think you alluded to some of this, right? We're seeing people alive 10 years out. That's our, longest follow-up. Some of those people actually still have disease and they will develop what's called secondary resistance. So they had a response that clearly their life has been prolonged through these treatments. But they're having either secondary resistance and also some of this they're also maybe suffering some of the side effects of some of the aggressive treatment that was given up front. For example, radiation and such can have long-term side effects that we need to address. So I think in that setting, we need to say, what can we do to make the treatment more effective, and also with the hope that these people are living long term, also to give, a quality of life and maybe even de-escalate treatment in some patients who we know are doing well or that we can have, less toxic, if you will, side effects from. The other group of patients are the patients that think of as having primary resistance. Those people didn't really respond at all. And those people we need to really understand much, much better. And unfortunately, a lot of those patients fall into some of our more rare melanoma subtypes, as you alluded to, patients with either acral or mucosal or ocular melanoma. Those are a much higher hurdle to get to have a response. They're more likely to be primarily resistant. And also people, as you said, who present with like wide leptomeningeal disease, etc. So I think those are the areas where we need to understand more. We really need this, again, melanoma community to come together, which some people here are obviously, everyone here is actually doing, to try to group our resources together so that we can all learn and accelerate this as fast as we can.
So is there a particular therapy class that you're really excited about that's advancing in melanoma cell-based approaches.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, so we alluded to the fact that checkpoint blockade was really the first FDA-approved drug. So this again takes the brakes off the immune system, as you will, and allows your own body to attack the cancer. But the other area that's been researched for many, many years is something called adoptive T cell therapy or TIL therapy. And this involves taking out a tumor from the patient, growing up the immune cells, and then infusing them back into the patient. And this has been going on for many years at the NIH, but was just FDA approved last year for patients with melanoma. And I think that is opening up a whole new, area of exploration. How can we make these, what we call TILs, better? How can we make them more effective? How can we get more of these cells in tumors that don't have as much of a response to the immune system? So that's a really exciting area. And I feel like it's like our first version of immune checkpoint blockade is where we are with TIL therapy. So that's exciting, but there's a whole nother avenue of the immune system that's first of all, the immune system, the recognition that curtailing the immune system in one way or another can be effective. There's new approaches to that. So another new really exciting areas is in an area of personalized ways to augment your immune system, and one of these is what we call a personalized tumor vaccine, if you will, and that is looking at ways using some of the technology that was utilized for COVID vaccination, this RNA backbone, to deliver the specific mutations in your tumor to your immune system so your immune system can see that. And that is being combined with immune therapy, and it has some very promising results in a phase 3 trial, which is just finished accruing. So we're really, I think, excited about that. We're also excited about new trials that are looking at other ways to get your immune system to recognize cancers. And these are things called T cell receptors or CAR Ts. And basically, these are kind of high designers type of immune therapies that are really looking, again, in a more specific way to a patient's tailored tumor to try to get the immune system involved. And then on the other hand, I think we're still making tremendous inroads in trying to understand what the genetics are of melanomas, how they differ in different types of melanoma, how we can understand the vulnerabilities in different genetic pathways that could be targeted with new drugs. So one of the exciting areas for people is some of these new drugs that target the main pathway, as you alluded to, these BRAF mutations, this MAP kinase pathway, and there's new drugs, dimers, other types of things that are showing great promise in effectiveness. And again, these drugs are being looked at first in melanoma, but they have implications in pancreas cancer, colon cancer, thyroid cancer, other types of cancers as well.
Yeah, that's a great overview. And the cancers that you just mentioned at the end, like pancreatic and some of the other ones, really desperately need new therapies to treat their patients. So, I thank you for all that information. Very exciting time, as usual, in the melanoma field to lead the way. Now, we talked a lot about cutaneous melanoma, but we've also alluded to different rare subtypes of melanoma. So 90% of melanoma is called cutaneous melanoma. It's the more common melanoma that presumably is caused by exposure to ultraviolet light from the sun or tanning beds. The other 10% is made up of 3 different types of melanoma. One is called acral melanoma, and that type of melanoma is usually forms on the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, and your nail beds. But really the non-sun exposed portions. The other melanoma that's a rare subtype is mucosal melanoma, which forms in the mucosal linings of many of our tissues and cavities, the sinus cavity, oral cavity, GI tract, anogenital tract. And obviously those are areas in the body that are not sun exposed. And then, of course, there is uveal or ocular melanoma, melanoma of the eye. And collectively, those three melanomas make up about 10% of the remaining melanoma subtypes. So we consider them the rare melanoma subtypes. Pediatric melanoma, not listed, is also considered rare. It's a bit different than melanoma found in adults, and it is fairly rare. But typically, a lot of these rare melanoma subtypes are diagnosed at a more advanced stage of the disease. They may be, as you might hear, more difficult to diagnose. And the approved therapies, unfortunately, generally are not as effective in treating these subtypes when compared to cutaneous melanoma. So the treatments that are working really well in the more common cutaneous don't typically work as well in the rare subtypes. Now, over the last few years, there have been two drug approvals, more specifically for uveal melanoma, but still but they, for certain reasons, can only be used in a subset of, one of them can only be used in a subset of uveal patients, and then the other one is really to treat liver mets. So with that being said, what happened in 2020 was a group of acral and mucosal patients approached the MRA and said, we really need more research done in our rare melanoma subtypes. And the way we're thinking is to actually have a direct-to-patient registry so that researchers and clinicians can gain the perspective of the patients who are diagnosed with these diseases. And they indicated, well, unfortunately, we don't think we could do it. Would the MRA be interested in supporting and sponsoring this registry? And sure enough, we created the MRA's Rare Melanoma Registry, which is one of our signature programs. We're sponsoring this registry, and it is a direct-to-patient registry for patients with acral mucosal, and we also do include the more common type of melanoma, cutaneous melanoma, as one of the groups. Now, you might say, didn't she just say that there's a third rare melanoma subtype, uveal? Yes, there is. But as we created this registry, there are about 3 or 4 other registries for uveal melanoma. So we didn't want to be competitive. We wanted to be collaborative. So we decided not to include uveal patients, but to make sure uveal patients who tried to go on to the rare melanoma registry that we were sponsoring would know about these other registries that they could enroll in. So this really brought together a true community between patients, caregivers, researchers, and clinicians working with the same goal of accelerating research for these rare subtypes. And as I mentioned, the registry was built by a group of patient advocates, and Amy Jardin is one, a very strong advocate and part of the oversight committee for the Rare Registry. And, it continues to be guided by patient advocates, medical advisors, as well as scientific advisors. And a little bit more on the registry. Again, it's web-based. Again, it's direct-to-patient registry. And participants are asked after they consent to fill out a series of surveys. They're also given the ability to upload medical reports. And then in return, we generate emails that are sent to the participants and provide them with different types of educational information, including clinical trial alerts, webinar notifications. And so for participants, they get access to this additional information. But what's really neat is you see on the right-hand side of this slide what the registry portal looks like and the different surveys that we include to collect different information. What they also do through this dashboard is they can go on the dashboard and see aggregated de-identified data, which means data that's stripped of all personal identifiers like your name, your address, your phone number, whatever. So it's de-identified. And they could also click on a question that they've answered and see what other participants in the Rare Registry answered and where they fit in. So we try to give them research back so that they really feel part of the research community. And really, the Rare Registry is an opportunity to be part of a community that's dedicated to advancing research for these rare melanoma patients. So, Amy, you are a very strong advocate for the Rare Registry, or on our oversight committee. We appreciate all the push, the support, the continued support and participation in making this registry a success. I'll first start off with, because we really haven't talked about a journey with a rare melanoma subtype. So you have acral melanoma, very different from cutaneous melanoma in terms of the diagnosis. I'm sure you had you probably had a much more different experience than cutaneous melanoma patients being diagnosed. So can you share some of that journey with us?
Sure. Thank you, Joan. It's a pleasure to be here. My acral journey started in 2015. I was watching TV with my husband. My area between my fourth and fifth toe started itching, and it just wouldn't stop. I finally took my sock off and had a look at what was down there bothering me. It was January, so it was not like there was, it just was weird that it was itching. I took my sock off and spread my toes, and I saw this spot that was about the size of a plastic pinhead. I'd never seen it before, and it had irregular edges to it. I showed it to my husband, and he's like, "That doesn't look good." I already had an appointment with my primary care doctor, as I had not been feeling well. And I saw her the following Monday. She said, "This is fine. Don't worry about it. Come back next week. I'll biopsy, but don't worry about it." I thought, well, that's interesting, but this is not a spot that's supposed to be there. I had never seen it before. I went back the next week. She took a biopsy. The whole time I was in there, she just kept saying, "This is nothing. Don't worry about it. This is nothing. Don't worry about it. You'll have the results by the end of the week." That week came and went. The next week came and went. And I received a phone call where the nurse stumbled over some words and told me I had melanoma. And in the next breath, she asked me who I wanted to do my surgery. And I said, I'll need to call you back. She seemed surprised by that. I'm trying to absorb the fact that I just was told I had melanoma. I know that that's a bad skin cancer. My mom had died about 2 years before of a recalcitrant cancer. My sister was diagnosed 6 months before with a different cancer. This was a lot to absorb. And all she told me was general surgeons, and she gave me the name of about 3 doctors. I asked around and picked one of them because I was just going off of what my doctor's office had said. I've met with that surgeon. He said that he would remove a centimeter of skin around all edges of the lesion, because that's part of the wide lesion excision procedure. And it was just on the cusp of being large enough to have a lymph node be mandatory to lymph node removal. So I went ahead and had that done. He told me to sit on the couch for a month with my foot up and not do anything. At the time I was a runner, and this was a little bit of a painful recovery, but I'm following doctor's orders. I'm not going to Dr. Google. I'm not doing a lot of things that 20 years before, when I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, I had done those things. And I thought, I'm just going to go with what the doctors are telling me. Melanoma, surgeries come a long way for cancers and everything, and this is good. So the general surgeon did my biopsy and did my wide lesion excision, excuse me. Then I saw an oncologist for one visit, he said, and the oncologist told me that I would see her for the next 5 years. So it was interesting. Nobody told me I had a rare melanoma. I remember the nurse stumbling over some words, and that was it. So I had melanoma. The next year, I was in Washington, D.C. for an advocacy day. I wanted to be active and ask for more awareness and more research for this cancer. So I was in DC. I happened to be there the weekend before. I went to a running expo, and something I had not seen before was a cancer group with magazines of past issues. And the past issue happened to be one that talked about hands and foot melanoma. So I went home. I had to wait until I flew back home. pulled up my records, and that's when I realized I have a rare melanoma. Not one medical person told me that this is different than cutaneous. Leah did not talk about this, but people, when they found out I had melanoma, they were blaming me as a patient because you were in the sun, you used a tanning bed, and I feel frustrated that people will blame melanoma patients for having cancer. It is really sad and frustrating that people do this, but it is the reality of it. So once I found out I had a rare melanoma, I started, talking about it because I wanted to raise awareness. This was not just simple cutaneous melanoma. I'd always felt a little different when I talked about melanoma between my toes, and people would be surprised that that's where melanoma can grow. It's not a place where it gets the sun normally. Um, and once I connected with MRA, with Melanoma Research Alliance, it's really where I felt like I took off with meeting other people and finding my group of people who are passionate about research and advocacy. Um, and there's something to be said for meeting people online virtually who might have the same cancer. But my first patient forum that I went to with Melanoma Research Alliance, and I met in person other people with acral melanoma, I have to say that is just, it just was amazing to meet people who have been through what you have been through. It was just super amazing. I'm also aware that I'm quite lucky. Mine was diagnosed as stage 1A. The surgeon did just remove basically an inch of skin between my toes. I have my toes. I'm very lucky. Most people with acral melanoma, excuse me, they have they're missing toes or fingers. Their nails are gone because that's what has to happen to stop this cancer, and it's really hard for people with this.
Yeah, it's so amazing that, you didn't exactly know what melanoma you had and had to learn about that yourself. And also, I'm glad that at an MRA patient forum you were able to meet um, another acral patient, because you do feel alone when you have these rare diseases. You feel like you're sitting out there and like, am I the only one? It's scary, but that's why, I believe you built a Facebook community,
Yes.
and that's where your advocacy to help start the Rare Registry came in. So how do you feel about the registry and your passion for it, and why it would be important for patients to join?
The Rare Registry was just an exciting avenue for me to be able to say, I want to help researchers facilitate more understanding about this cancer and how people live with it and what we experience, but also to hear from researchers what's going on. And we can interact with the researchers. On the Rare Registry, you're submitting your information and you're uploading that, and it's all going to be stripped of your identifying information. But we can also go back there. It's not, I don't think it's quite there yet, but we will be able to go back there and find connections with researchers as they're doing things and be able to answer questions and ask questions through that. And it's just as another level of being able to pay it forward in being here, being lucky to be a stage 1A, but also make the path smoother for people who are coming up. Um, Melanoma sadly is probably not going to go away. It's going to be here. Other forms will be diagnosed. These rare forms will be diagnosed, and we just want to make the path smoother for other people.
Yeah, well, that's very commendable. And what Amy was alluding to, in the Rare Registry, patients fill out different surveys. They're able to upload medical records, where we are going to put a connection in soon where patients can consent to provide us access to their electronic medical records, so we can pull out even more clinical information. And that clinical information and patient entered information on their quality of life, how they were monitored, will be tied together and de-identified, so that we could also give researchers access to this information, so they can tie very robust clinical information with the patient's journey and learn more about the disease and how to treat it, and certainly how to manage it. So thank you, Amy, for helping to lead the charge on this really important registry. It's another type of research study that you could be involved with. And it doesn't involve treatment. It's not a treatment type of protocol. It just involves you signing, consenting, and providing information. And in return, getting educational information, alerts to different trials that you can discuss with your doctors, as well as seeing how the other participants in the registry are responding. So you're interacting and you're actually being part of a research study, contributing to it, and also looking at the data at the same time. So it's really, really exciting. So in the remaining few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Arian and ask you, so in the eyes of a clinician, what words of wisdom can you provide, or does your clinical staff provide to the patient community that is considerate to participate in research studies? And perhaps your research studies might be more clinical trials involving different treatments. I mean, what do you say to a patient to get them to understand what a research study is about and the importance of being part of this research study?
Thank you for this question, because I think it's so important, and there is some fear for some patients, I think, when they hear the word study, because they think, oh, this is not going to be standard treatments. But I think, as you heard today, clinical trials come in two avenues in general. One is knowledge, right? Understanding genetic factors or other things. I'm so sorry. Understanding genetic, predispositions, other environmental factors, other things that we could never gather from just, as particularly in rare cancers, is so important, and can only be done through studies that allow for these collaborations to happen, and through rare registries like what you're establishing here, and they're so powerful. And the risk of sharing your information, which is very carefully curated, and not something that people could easily identify who you are at all. Many protections are in place to allow that protection, is really minimal. And so I think that's knowledge, and knowledge is power, and knowledge is what's going to drive us forward and allow other questions to be asked. The second types of questions are, the second types of research studies are often interventional. And so, as you said, can be new treatments, other things, and things we alluded to today that I didn't even discuss. But for example, in uveal melanoma, where there's this unmet need, clinical trials identified this bispecific antibody, a whole new treatment paradigm that is successful in treating this type of cancer. Or, we have new drugs coming in PD-1 resistant melanoma. And so, for example, we're really excited. We think these intratumoral therapies are getting better and better and can help reverse resistance to therapies. So clinical trials, we as investigators are not trying to do a clinical trial on something that already is a win, right? We're trying to give patients, yes, we're going to give you the safe, what we know is a win. We're trying to do a clinical trial where there's an unmet need, where we don't have a good answer for you. And so we like to say that potentially, you could be getting tomorrow's treatment today, right? Like that's what happened with the first people who got immune therapy and such. And so, yes, we're all trying to learn. We're trying to learn, why you respond, why you don't respond, but it's really an opportunity to explore a potential treatment, and contribute to the general knowledge, not only for melanoma patients, but for the oncology community in general. So it's hard to say not to have any fear, but I think really understand and have a long discussion with your care provider, so that you can understand where you are in your journey, and does it make sense to enter into a clinical trial now or pursue a different type of more standard therapy. But the reason why someone's usually introducing a clinical trial that's therapeutic is because there's not a great option for you at this time.
Yeah, those are great points to make to patients. And, you know, you're really managed so carefully when you undergo a clinical trial. There's this, you know, the protocol really defines how you're going to be monitored and managed. So,
That's a
you know,
great point, actually, is
yeah.
that if you look at clinical trials, often the outcomes are better in patients who are clinical trials compared to when it goes into the real world. And there's many reasons for that, including selection, et cetera. But also you actually are opened up to a whole nother level of care and that, you know, is not always there when it gets to be a standard treatment. So
Sure. Well, thank you for that information. And now, finally, I'll turn to first Leah and then Amy and ask the same question. So, what would you want a newly diagnosed melanoma patient to know about with respect to being a self-advocate, with respect to looking into what foundations could provide, what resources are available to them? You know, again, what are your thoughts and what would you say to a newly diagnosed patient with melanoma, either cutaneous or a rare subtype? Leah?
Yeah, I would probably say that first and foremost, you're not alone. I know that before I really dove into the melanoma community, I truly felt like I was the only 26-year-old that had melanoma. And obviously that's silly. But, you know, I think as humans, we kind of get in our head when we really go through a traumatic experience or something that really changes your life, that in that moment you feel like you are the only person going through it. And Amy kind of touched on this, but I will say, you know, social media has a lot of negative sides to it, but it also has a lot of positive sides. And I would have never connected with all of these amazing people in the melanoma community if it weren't for social media. And I think that's my second point of advice, is that reach out for support and community, because there are hundreds and thousands of people that have had melanoma that really get it and understand it. And, you know, Amy touched on this, that, you know, you can have amazing family in your life, amazing friends, but there's nothing like somebody that's actually walked through your shoes that understands what melanoma is, whether it's stage 1 or stage 0, those early stages, or those stage 4 that I spoke about with my dad's situation. And so I would say, you know, you're not alone. Reach out for community and support, and reach out to the foundations and the organizations. Melanoma Research Alliance was one of the first organizations I reached out to. And they not only gave me support resources and information for my melanoma, but also for my dad as well. And it just, again, made me feel less alone and made me feel heard. And always be an advocate for yourself. That would be my final piece of advice. Whether you're a patient or a caregiver, sometimes when you're a caregiver, you have to be that patient's voice for them, because they sometimes don't feel like they have a voice or
Right.
even want to use their voice. And so that's also something I've learned as well. So, yeah, that would be my words of advice.
Yeah, thank you, Leah. Yeah, sometimes, you know, as a patient, you might blank out in a doctor's office. So, you know, you really need people there with you, people being supportive, but it's also great to be able to actually meet people who are going through your experiences to feel that additional level of support. So Amy, we'll end with your thoughts.
Everybody's covered it really greatly. I don't know what more I can really say. Um, I guess I would just say, you know, go ahead and get that second opinion. I felt like I already had that without seeing a doctor, because my labs were sent to a specialty hospital before I was even notified of my cancer. So I already had that confirmation of what was in there. But don't be afraid to change doctors. If that's something that you feel like you aren't being heard. And that's something I struggled with with the acral melanoma. I just felt like I wasn't being heard or seen as a rare melanoma patient. And I did seek the melanoma specialist in my state. And it was really great to be able to do that. It took me a while to do that though. And that's something I didn't want to offend my doctors that I was seeing. And that's where our patient advocacy comes into play, is that you have to do what's right for you. This is affecting your life, your loved ones' lives. You have to do what's best. Go ahead and have somebody with you at your doctor appointments or your treatment appointments, because everybody's going to hear something different. You know, if you want to take notes or not take notes, but when you come away from that, you can have a meeting with that person and say, what did you hear? This is what I heard. And you can share with that and come up with more questions to ask the doctor next time. And it's easy these days with the MyChart system to be able to rattle those questions off to the doctors right then. And I'd say just, if you want to get involved, there are plenty of ways to become an advocate. And locally in your community, you can raise your voice a little harder, louder, get it out there with national organizations. You can easily help somebody else going through this by just being there for them, being a listening ear. Yeah.
Thank you. All great suggestions. It's so important. Advocating for yourself is critical, and not being afraid to say, I think I need a second opinion. Is that going to offend my doctor? And I could look at Dr. Arian and say, no, that doctors are used to that. And you should have to feel comfortable, and you have to feel knowledgeable of what your journey that lies ahead of you will be about. So at this point, I just want to
reiterate that enough, right? You're not, you're not offending a doctor.
Yeah.
You are, maybe it's not the, the right thing, but I mean, it's just, you had to be comfortable with everything. And, and as physicians, we reach out to other people too. So it's just.
You get other colleagues, input
Sure.
into some of your cases.
Sure.
So
Sure.
yeah.
It's shown to be something that improves outcomes, to have a group that gets together. We call these disease management groups that get together and discuss patients. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So at this point, I just want to thank Leah, Amy, Dr. Arian, for joining this webinar, sharing their thoughts, sharing their patient journeys, their clinical experience, and how much progress the melanoma research field has made. I also want to thank Research Match for the opportunity for this webinar to share with the broader community our advances and the importance of doing different types of research studies. If you would like to contact the Melanoma Research Alliance, there's information on this slide on how we can be contacted in all our social media channels that we're on. So thank you, everybody, and everyone have a good rest of your day.
Thank you again, everyone. And as always, you can find us at researchmatch.org and then Cure Melanoma Alliance as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.